The gravy boat slipped from my fingers when Scott said it, porcelain shattering against hardwood as silence fell across the Thanksgiving table. "Face it, Barb," my son-in-law announced, swirling his expensive bourbon. "You've wasted your life taking care of others, and now you're just, financially irrelevant." My daughter Jennifer stared at her plate, saying nothing. That's when I decided 30 years of swallowing my pride was enough. What Scott didn't know was that the lakefront property he'd been desperately trying to buy, the historic estate he'd pointed out every time we drove past it, I'd owned it for months. The deed was sitting in my purse, right next to the pumpkin pie I'd baked from scratch that no one would eat. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I always believed that a mother's love should be unconditional and limitless. For 35 years, that's exactly what I gave to my daughter Jennifer. I worked double shifts at Lakeside Memorial Hospital to put her through college, sold my mother's antique jewelry to fund her semester abroad in Spain, and postponed my own dreams of traveling so she could have everything I never did. When Jennifer met Scott Mitchell during her final year of graduate school, I was thrilled for her. He came from a wealthy family. The Mitchells owned half the commercial real estate in downtown Lakeside, and he had the kind of confidence that filled a room. I ignored the way his eyes glazed over whenever I spoke about my nursing career. I pretended not to notice how he'd check his watch during our family dinners, as if calculating the exact minute he could politely leave. "Mom, Scott thinks I should apply for a teaching position at Lakeside Elementary," Jennifer told me one afternoon over coffee at the Daily Grind. "It doesn't pay as much as the private school offer, but his family has connections with the school board. Plus, it would look better when we have children to be involved in the community." I nodded supportively while mentally calculating how much of my savings I could contribute to help them with a down payment on their first home. I never mentioned that I'd been saving for a modest retirement condo in Florida, where the winters wouldn't aggravate my arthritis. When they announced their engagement 6 months later, I threw myself into wedding planning. Scott's parents, Richard and Diane, hosted an extravagant engagement party at the Lakeside Country Club, where I stood awkwardly in a department store dress among women draped in designer labels. "Barbara works at the hospital," I overheard Diane telling another guest, her voice dripping with calculated politeness. "She's a nurse, so dedicated to her calling." The wedding cost more than I'd made in 3 years, but I contributed every penny I could. Jennifer looked radiant walking down the aisle, and that was all that mattered. When she and Scott bought their colonial-style home in Oakwood Estates, I liquidated my remaining investments to help with the down payment. My name never appeared on any documents. Scott insisted the gift should be clean and uncomplicated. Over the next 9 years, I became the reliable support system for their growing family. I was the emergency babysitter for Tyler and Emma, the holiday meal preparer, the homework helper during Jennifer's late faculty meetings. I'd drive 40 minutes each way, often after 12-hour shifts at the hospital, because family comes first. Retirement crept up on me faster than I'd expected. At 60, my knees couldn't handle the hospital rounds anymore, and my pension would cover only the basics. But just when I was preparing for a scaled-back future, Ruth Campbell changed everything. Ruth had been the hospital administrator when I first started as a young nurse. After her retirement, she developed Parkinson's disease, and her children, who lived on opposite coasts, hired me as her part-time home health nurse. What began as a professional relationship evolved into a deep friendship over 5 years. 3 afternoons a week, I'd sit with Ruth in her sunroom, reading poetry aloud, or simply listening to her stories about traveling through Europe in the 1970s. "You know, Barbara," she told me one autumn afternoon as golden light filtered through the windows of her Victorian home. "You gave up too much for others. I see it in you, that quiet resignation, but it's never too late to claim something for yourself." I laughed it off. "That's just what mothers do, Ruth." She fixed me with a stern look, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for her tea. "No, that's what you did. And while it's admirable, it's also incomplete." When Ruth passed away in her sleep that winter, I mourned not just a patient, but a true friend. I never expected to be mentioned in her will, let alone to receive a substantial inheritance. Ruth had left me $850,000 and a handwritten note. "Barbara, now it's your turn to live. Don't waste it trying to buy anyone's love." I told no one about the inheritance. Not Jennifer, not Scott, not even my closest friend Carol. Something in me wanted to protect this unexpected gift from being parceled out to others before I had a chance to decide what it meant for me. For once, I wanted to make a decision that was entirely my own. 2 weeks after receiving Ruth's gift, I attended Thanksgiving dinner at Jennifer and Scott's house. It was there, surrounded by crystal glasses and porcelain serving dishes that had been wedding gifts, that everything changed. Our part 2, the breaking point. Thanksgiving at the Mitchell household was always a performance. Jennifer spent days preparing, polishing silver that rarely left the cabinet, and pressing napkins into elaborate folds she'd learned from home decorating shows. Scott's parents, Richard and Diane, were always in attendance, along with his sister Melissa, and whatever social climbing friends the Mitchells deemed worthy that year. I arrived early to help, as always, carrying homemade pies and side dishes. Jennifer greeted me with a distracted kiss on the cheek before returning to her turkey basting. The kitchen smelled of rosemary and tension. "Mom, could you please use the good china for the cranberry sauce? Not those everyday dishes?" Jennifer sighed, rearranging my work. "The Harrises are joining us this year. Jack Harris just made partner at Scott's firm." I quietly transferred the cranberry sauce to the proper dish, ignoring the familiar sting of criticism. From the living room, I could hear Scott talking, loudly about the real estate market, his voice carrying that practiced confidence that impressed everyone except me. "The Lakeview estate is finally coming on the market," he was saying. "Most historic property on the North Shore. If I could get my hands on that, we'd be set. Ultimate status symbol in this town." I smiled to myself. The Lakeview estate had been my first purchase after receiving Ruth's inheritance. The real estate agent, Tanya Reynolds, had been shocked when I paid in cash. No financing needed. I'd sworn her to secrecy about the buyer's identity, a privacy clause that cost extra but felt necessary. I hadn't even decided what to do with the property yet. I just knew how much Scott coveted it, how he pointed it out every time we drove past. When dinner was served, I took my usual place at the far end of the table, away from the important conversations. 8-year-old Tyler sat beside me, while 6-year-old Emma sat between her grandparents, already learning the family hierarchy. "Barbara," Diane called down the table. "Jennifer tells me you've finally retired. How are you filling your days? Knitting?" She laughed as though she'd said something clever. "I'm exploring my options," I replied evenly. "There's a lot of life left to live." Scott snorted into his wine glass. "At your age? With what resources? Let's be realistic, Barb." "I have my pension," I said, "and my health." "A hospital pension," Scott said, emphasizing each syllable. "After taxes, what's that? 2,000-3,000 a month? Barely covers a decent apartment in this town." Jennifer gave him a warning look that he ignored. "You know," Scott continued, refilling his glass, "you should have planned better, invested something. All those years working, and what do you have to show for it? You've barely got enough to cover your rent, and certainly nothing to leave behind for the kids." The table grew quiet. Even Richard, usually eager to join his son in financial lecturing, looked uncomfortable. "I provided for my family as best I could," I said, feeling heat rise in my face. "That's the problem with your generation," Scott said, warming to his subject. "No financial literacy. You worked yourself to the bone without building actual wealth. And now..." He gestured vaguely at me. You're dependent on Social Security and whatever scraps the hospital pension gives you. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I gripped my napkin under the table. I helped put Jennifer through school. I helped with your down payment. And we're grateful, Jennifer interjected quickly. Scott doesn't mean, Scott cut her off, that there's a difference between sentimentality and reality. Face it, Barb, you've wasted your life taking care of others, and now you're just financially irrelevant. The gravy boat I was passing to Tyler slipped from my fingers, crashing onto the hardwood floor. Porcelain shards and thick gravy splattered across the dining room as a terrible silence fell. I'm so sorry, I whispered, already reaching for my napkin to clean the mess. For God's sake, Scott muttered. The Waterford set. That was part of a collection. Jennifer jumped up. It's fine, Mom. I'll get the mop. Just stay seated. But I was already on my knees, dabbing at the spreading puddle of gravy, fighting back tears that had nothing to do with broken dishware. As I cleaned, I felt something shift inside me. A lifetime of accommodation and sacrifice hardening into a resolve I barely recognized. Tyler slipped from his chair and knelt beside me. I'll help, Grandma, he whispered, using his own napkin to soak up the gravy. When I looked up, I saw Diane watching us with a mixture of disdain and pity. In that moment, I made a decision. I would no longer be the person they could dismiss, the financial footnote in their family story. Ruth's parting words echoed in my mind. Now it's your turn to live. I carefully gathered the broken pieces and carried them to the kitchen, my back straight, my eyes dry. When I returned, conversation had awkwardly resumed about the Lakeview estate. I heard through the grapevine it already sold, Richard was saying. Some mystery buyer paid cash, over asking price. Scott looked personally offended. That's impossible. I have alerts set up for any movement on that property. Who would swoop in like that? I took my seat and smiled politely. More turkey? Anyone? Part 3. The Unseen Advantage. The Monday after Thanksgiving, while Jennifer and Scott were at work and the children at school, I drove to the daily grind to meet my oldest friend, Carol Johnson. We'd been friends since nursing school, and she was the only person who had seen every sacrifice I'd made over the decades without judgment. You look different, Carol said, studying my face over her cappuccino. Something's changed. I hesitated, then reached into my purse and slid an envelope across the table. I haven't told anyone about this, not even Jennifer. Carol opened the envelope and gasped at the bank statement inside. Barbara Wilson, where on earth did you get $800,000? Did you rob a bank and forget to mention it? I explained about Ruth's inheritance, watching Carol's expression shift from shock to delight to something like vindication. It's about damn time the universe paid you back, she said, squeezing my hand. So what are you going to do with it? I already did something, I admitted. Remember the Lakeview estate? The historic property on North Shore Drive with the boathouse? Carol's eyes widened. The one Scott's been drooling over for years? The symbol of having made it in Lakeside? You didn't. I did. I bought it 2 months ago. Paid cash. I couldn't help the small smile that formed. The deed is sitting in my safe deposit box. Does Scott know? Carol whispered, leaning forward. No one knows except you and my realtor, and she's bound by confidentiality. Carol leaned back, shaking her head in amazement. So at Thanksgiving, when Scott called you financially irrelevant, he had no idea I own the house he's been obsessing over for years. I took a slow sip of my tea. The house he told Diane was the ultimate status symbol. Oh, this is delicious, Carol laughed. So when are you going to tell them? I thought about it for a moment. I'm not sure yet. Part of me wants to keep it private a little longer. I've never had anything that was just mine before. What will you do with the house? I don't know, I admitted. Maybe live in it. Maybe sell it. Maybe turn it into a bed and breakfast. For the first time in my life, I don't have to decide based on what other people need from me. Carol studied me. You know they're going to try to insert themselves the minute they find out. Jennifer will assume it's her inheritance coming early. Scott will have investment advice. They'll have opinions about every doorknob. I nodded, knowing she was right. That's why I'm not telling them yet. I need time to figure out what I want without their voices in my head. As we left the coffee shop, Carol hugged me tightly. Ruth would be proud of you, Barb. Just promise. Me one thing. When you do tell Scott, make sure I'm there to see his face. Later that evening, I stood outside the Lakeview estate, my estate, watching the sunset reflect off the lake. The house was a stately Victorian with a wide porch, detailed gingerbread trim, and a separate boathouse that had been renovated into a charming guest cottage. Built in 1897 by one of Lakeside's founding families, it had history embedded in every floorboard. I used my key to let myself in, walking slowly through empty rooms that echoed with possibility. When I'd bought the property, I'd specifically asked that it remain unfurnished. I wanted a blank canvas, not someone else's vision. Standing in the grand front parlor with its bay windows overlooking the lake, I pulled out my phone and dialed the number I'd been considering all day. Tanya Reynolds, answered my realtor. Tanya, it's Barbara Wilson. I've made a decision about the Lakeview property. I took a deep breath. I'd like to begin renovations next week. Nothing structural, just updates to the systems and a fresh look throughout. I'm thinking of moving in by spring. That's wonderful, Barbara. I can connect you with some excellent contractors who specialize in historic homes. Perfect. And Tanya? I'd like to maintain the privacy arrangement. No one needs to know who owns this house just yet. After hanging up, I walked to the master bedroom, where a large bay window created a perfect reading nook overlooking the water. I could already imagine myself there with a book and a cup of tea, watching the seasons change across the lake. For the first time in decades, I was making plans that centered entirely on my own happiness. I thought about Scott's dismissive words at Thanksgiving, how he'd reduced my entire life to a financial failure, how my own daughter had sat silently, unwilling to defend me. The memory still stung, but it no longer devastated me. I had options now. I had power. As I locked up the house and walked back to my car, I noticed a familiar black BMW cruising slowly past the property. Scott's car. He must have been making one of his regular drive-bys to gaze longingly at his dream house. I ducked behind a large oak tree until he passed, smiling to myself as his car disappeared around the bend. He had no idea that the financially irrelevant mother-in-law he'd dismissed now held the deed to the very symbol of success he coveted. And for now, that was my own private satisfaction. Part 4. The Inner Awakening. December passed in a blur of quiet planning and subtle changes. I gave notice at my apartment, telling the landlord I'd be moving out in March when my lease ended. I met discreetly with contractors at the Lakeview estate, approving renovations that honored the home's history while creating spaces that felt like me. I began declining some of the babysitting requests that had previously dominated my schedule. I'm sorry. I have a commitment that evening, became my new refrain, though I never specified that my commitment was to myself. Perhaps a book I wanted to read, or simply an evening of peace. Jennifer noticed the change first. You've been hard to reach lately, Mom, she said when I finally answered one of her calls. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, I assured her. I'm just exploring some new interests now that I'm retired. Like what? Her tone was skeptical, as if she couldn't imagine what interests I might have outside of service to her family. I'm taking a watercolor class at the community center, I said, which was actually true. And I'm thinking about traveling a bit. Traveling? Where? That sounds expensive. The concern in her voice wasn't for my safety, but my finances. I've been saving, I said simply. There's a lot of world I haven't seen yet. There was a pause before Jennifer asked, "So will you still be able to watch the kids next weekend? Scott and I have the charity gala, and you know how he feels about hiring sitters for overnight." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar pull of obligation. For a moment, I almost said yes automatically, as I always had. But then I remembered the look on Scott's face as he declared me financially irrelevant, and my resolve strengthened. "I'm sorry, but I've already made plans for that weekend. I'm going to visit Carol at her lake house." The silence on the other end of the line stretched uncomfortably. "Mom, we've had this gala on the calendar for months. It's essential for Scott's networking. Surely Carol would understand if you rescheduled." "Jennifer," I said, my voice gentler than I felt. "I've watched the children 26 weekends in the past year. This is one weekend I've planned for myself in advance. You have time to find a sitter." "I can't believe you're being so selfish," she muttered, and then more clearly, "Fine, I'll figure something out." After we hung up, I sat in my apartment surrounded by decades of accumulated belongings, considering which would come with me to my new life and which would stay behind. The china cabinet that had been my mother's, yes. The worn sofa that had seen better days, no. The photo albums documenting Jennifer's childhood, of course. The drawer full of children's artwork. I'd saved only the most special pieces. It was while sorting through this drawer that I found a Mother's Day card Jennifer had made me when she was 9. On the front, she'd drawn a picture of the two of us holding hands. Inside, in careful childish printing, she'd written, "To my mom, who gives me everything and never asks for anything back. I want to be just like you someday." I traced the faded letters with my fingertip, remembering the little girl who had seen sacrifice as beautiful rather than exploitable. When had that changed? Was it gradual, or had there been a moment when Jennifer decided I was less worthy of consideration than her husband's ambitions? That night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, really looking at myself for perhaps the first time in years. I saw the silver threading through my brown hair, the laugh lines around my eyes, the slight softening beneath my chin, but I also saw determination in my gaze that hadn't been there before. A woman who was done disappearing for others' comfort. The next morning, I made an appointment at an upscale salon downtown, the kind I'd always considered too extravagant. 4 hours later, I emerged with a stylish bob that framed my face, subtle highlights that brightened my features, and a professional makeup application that emphasized my green eyes. "You look amazing," said the stylist, turning my chair toward the mirror for the big reveal. For a moment, I hardly recognized myself. Not because I looked so different, but because I looked so present, so visible. "I have one more appointment, today," I told the receptionist as I paid. "Can you recommend a good boutique nearby? I need some new clothes." By the time I returned to my apartment that evening, carrying shopping bags from stores whose names I'd previously only seen on other women's shopping bags, I felt like I'd crossed some internal threshold. Looking good wasn't about vanity. It was about reclaiming the parts of myself I'd set aside while I focused on everyone else's needs. I hung my new clothes in the closet, a tailored blazer in deep teal, black pants with a perfect drape, a silky blouse in a shade of crimson I'd always admired but never worn. These weren't extravagant purchases, but they were intentional. Armor, of a sort, for the woman I was becoming. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time since Jennifer was small. "Today, I chose myself," I wrote. Not out of selfishness, but because I finally understand that disappearing doesn't actually help anyone. It just establishes a pattern that gets harder and harder to break. Ruth's gift wasn't just financial. It was permission to exist on my own terms. I don't know exactly who I'm becoming, but I know she won't be invisible anymore. I closed the journal and placed it on my nightstand, feeling a sense of calm resolve settle over me. The confrontation with Scott and Jennifer was inevitable, but for the first time, I wasn't dreading it. I was preparing for it. I unlocked the heavy oak door of the Lakeview estate, stepping into what was now undeniably mine. The contractors had finished the essential updates: plumbing, electrical, heating, while preserving the home's historic character. The original hardwood floors gleamed with fresh polish, and the crown molding had been meticulously restored. In the parlor, bay windows captured the winter sunlight, casting long rectangles of warmth across the empty space. I moved from room to room with a notebook, sketching furniture arrangements and jotting color ideas. The master bedroom suite overlooked the lake, with French doors leading to a private balcony. I'd already ordered a king-sized bed with a tufted headboard, something I'd always wanted but could never justify. In my old apartment, I'd slept on the same queen mattress for 15 years, saving for Jennifer's future instead of investing in my own comfort. My phone vibrated with a text from Tanya, my realtor. Movers confirmed for March 15th. Still keeping it under wraps? I typed back, "Yes, for now. Thanks for your discretion." As I descended the grand staircase, my footsteps echoing in the empty house, I thought about how to furnish each space. Unlike Jennifer's home, filled with designer pieces selected to impress Scott's colleagues, I wanted rooms that invited people to linger. Overstuffed reading chairs, tables that could handle spilled coffee without panic, shelves overflowing with books you were actually meant to take down and read. In the kitchen, I ran my hand along the marble countertops, imagining Sunday dinners where Tyler and Emma could help make pasta without fear of making a mess. I'd teach them to bake using my mother's recipes, the way I'd taught Jennifer before. She became too busy with social commitments. The doorbell startled me from my planning. I wasn't expecting visitors, and almost no one knew I was here. Through the beveled glass panels of the front door, I could make out a familiar silhouette, Carol. "How did you know where to find me?" I asked, swinging open the door. Carol held up a paper bag. "You mentioned you were meeting contractors here today. I brought lunch and wine." She looked past me into the foyer with its sweeping staircase and crystal chandelier. "My God, Barb, it's even more magnificent than you described." I gave her the full tour, watching her face light up with each new discovery. The library with its built-in bookshelves, the sunroom with its view of the boathouse, the hidden door leading to what had once been the servants' quarters. "You could fit your entire apartment in just this wing," Carol marveled as we settled at the kitchen island with our sandwiches and wine. "Have you told Jennifer yet?" I shook my head. "Not yet. Every time I think I'm ready, something holds me back." "Fear?" "Not exactly." I sipped my wine, trying to articulate the feeling. "It's more that once I tell them, this becomes about them again. Their reactions, their expectations, their judgments. Right now, this is just mine." Carol nodded. "I get it. But you know they'll find out eventually. Lakeside isn't that big and people talk." "I know. I'm planning to tell them before I officially move in. I just need a little more time to get everything in order first." "Order meaning what, exactly?" Carol tilted her head. I pulled out my notebook and flipped to a page filled with lists and contacts. "I've been meeting with my financial advisor, making sure everything's properly structured for the long term. Setting up trusts for Tyler and Emma's education that can't be touched for other purposes. Creating a will that specifies exactly how I want my assets distributed." Carol's eyebrows rose. "You're not just buying furniture, you're building a fortress." "I'm being prudent," I corrected her. "Ruth's gift changed everything for me. I don't want it misused or taken for granted." "You mean you don't want Scott getting his hands on it and blowing it on status symbols?" I didn't deny it. "I want Tyler and Emma to have opportunities, not just material advantages." and I want to make sure I can live comfortably for whatever years I have left without constant pressure to contribute to household expenses that aren't mine. Carol reached across the island and squeezed my hand. Barbara Wilson, retirement suits you. I've never heard you sound so clear-eyed about your own needs. It's not just retirement, I admitted. It was that Thanksgiving dinner. Hearing Scott dismiss my entire life's work, watching Jennifer sit silently while he did it, something broke in me. But something else woke up. After Carol left, I wandered through the house again, this time lingering in the empty rooms that would soon become my home. In the library, I imagined shelves filled with books I'd never had time to read during my working years. In the garden room, I pictured lush plants thriving in the southern exposure. The formal dining room would host family dinners, but on my terms, with genuine conversation instead of social climbing. The following week, I visited a high-end furniture store downtown, one I'd previously only window shopped at while Jennifer selected pieces for her home. The interior designer approached me cautiously at first, perhaps sensing a browser rather than a buyer. "I've just purchased the Lakeview estate," I told her. "I need to furnish it entirely." Her demeanor shifted. Instantly. "The historic property on North Shore? What a magnificent home! When would you like to begin?" We spent 3 hours selecting pieces for each room. Elegant but comfortable, classic but not stuffy. I chose fabrics in rich jewel tones, rather than the safe neutrals that dominated Jennifer and Scott's home. When we reached the total, I handed over my credit card without flinching, even as a lifetime of frugality screamed in protest. "We can deliver everything once your renovations are complete," the designer assured me. "Would you like to add your name to our client list for our spring showcase? We feature our most beautiful home designs." I hesitated. "Let's wait on that. I'd prefer to keep my purchase private for now." As January turned to February, I continued, preparing for my new life. I joined a book club that met at the daily grind, making my first new friends in years. I enrolled in a cooking class focused on international cuisine, learning to make dishes I'd always wanted to try. I even hired a personal trainer at the local gym, determined to strengthen my body for the years ahead. When Jennifer called to ask me to babysit on Valentine's Day, I declined for the first time ever. "I'm sorry, I have plans that evening." The silence on the other end of the line was profound. "Plans? What plans could you possibly have on Valentine's Day?" The dismissive tone in her voice stung, but I kept my voice steady. "I'm attending a gallery opening with my book club. Several local artists are being featured. Since when do you go to gallery openings? Or have a book club?" Jennifer sounded genuinely confused, as if I'd started speaking a foreign language. "Since I retired and finally have time to explore my interests." I paused, then added gently, "I'm sure you can find a sitter. Teenagers are always looking for extra money." "But the kids are used to you," Jennifer protested. "And sitters charge ridiculous hourly rates." "Then perhaps Scott's parents could help? They're always saying they don't see enough of the children." Jennifer made a frustrated noise. "You know they only want the kids for Instagram-worthy outings, not actual childcare." "Mom, this is important. Scott made reservations at Le Bistro months ago." I felt the familiar pull of guilt, the ingrained response to put her needs above my own. For a moment, I almost relented. Then I remembered Scott's voice. "You've wasted your life taking care of others, and now you're just financially irrelevant." "I'm sorry, Jennifer. I've already committed to these plans. I can babysit next weekend instead, if that helps." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table, heart racing as if I'd run a marathon. Such a small boundary, yet it felt momentous. In the past, I would have canceled any personal plans without hesitation, prioritizing Jennifer's convenience above all else. The fact that she was so shocked by my refusal revealed just how one-sided our relationship had become. That evening, I called Carol. I did it. I said no to babysitting. Hallelujah! Carol cheered. How did it feel? Terrifying, then liberating, then terrifying again. That's how change works, Carol said. It gets easier with practice. By early March, my apartment was packed in labeled boxes, ready for the movers. I'd donated half my furniture and most of my kitchenware, keeping only what held sentimental value or would fit the aesthetic of my new home. The rest would be replaced with pieces that reflected this new chapter of my life. I'd chosen March 20th, the spring equinox, as my official moving day. The symbolism appealed to me. Equal parts darkness and light, perfect balance, a fresh start. The day before, I invited Carol over to help with the final preparations. Everything's set with the movers, I told her as we packed the last few items. They'll take my things to Lakeview tomorrow morning. The new furniture is being delivered in the afternoon. And when are you telling Jennifer and Scott? Carol asked, sealing a box with packing tape. I took a deep breath. Tonight. I've invited them to dinner at Giovanni's. Carol's eyes widened. Giovanni's? That's Scott's favorite restaurant, the one he takes clients to when he wants to impress them. Exactly. I've reserved a private dining room. I want neutral territory somewhere. Public enough that Scott will maintain his composure, but private enough for an honest conversation. Are you nervous? I considered the question. Strangely, no. I'm just ready for this part to be over so I can fully step into my new life. Carol hugged me tightly. I'm so proud of you, Barb. No matter how they react, remember this is your moment. You've earned it. That evening, I arrived at Giovanni's early, dressed in one of my new outfits. A tailored pantsuit in deep burgundy with a silk blouse that made my eyes look greener than usual. The maitre d' showed me to the private dining room I'd reserved, where a bottle of champagne already waited in an ice bucket. Your guests will be escorted back when they arrive, he assured me. Is there anything else you need, Mrs. Wilson? No, thank you. Everything is perfect. I sat alone at the elegantly set table for four, feeling strangely calm. In my purse was a folder containing the deed to the Lakeview estate, along with photos of the renovations and new furnishings. Also inside was a second folder with detailed information about the trusts I'd established for Tyler and Emma's education, generous provisions for their future that couldn't be accessed for any other purpose. At exactly 7 o'clock, the door opened and Jennifer and Scott entered. Jennifer looked surprised to see the private room, while Scott seemed pleased, likely assuming this was a sign I was finally embracing the kind of upscale dining he approved of. Mom, this is unexpected, Jennifer said, kissing my cheek. When you said Giovanni's, I didn't realize you meant the private dining room. I wanted somewhere special for our conversation, I replied, gesturing for them to sit. Scott surveyed the champagne and settings with newfound interest. What's the occasion, Barb? You're not usually one for extravagance. Let's order first, I suggested. Then we can talk. Throughout the appetizer course, we maintained polite conversation. Jennifer talked about the children's activities, Scott mentioned a client he was wooing, and I asked appropriate questions. Anyone observing would have seen nothing unusual, just a family enjoying an upscale dinner together. As the main courses arrived, Scott finally ran out of patience. Seriously, Barb, what's this about? You've never splurged on Giovanni's before. Something's clearly going on. I dabbed my lips with my napkin, took a sip of water, and met his gaze directly. You're right, Scott. I have some news to share with both of you. Jennifer's expression turned concerned. Mom, are you okay? Is it health-related? I'm perfectly healthy, I assured her. Better than I've been in years, actually. I reached into my purse and placed the folder on the table. I'm moving tomorrow. I've purchased a new home. Scott barked out a laugh. A new home? What? Like one of those senior living apartments with the emergency pull cords in the bathroom? Not exactly. I opened the folder and slid a photograph across the table. I've bought the Lakeview estate. The silence that followed was absolute. Jennifer's fork clattered against her plate. Scott stared at the photo, then at me, his expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and the beginnings of anger. "That's not funny," he finally said. "It's not meant to be." I placed the deed on the table. "I purchased it 4 months ago in cash. The renovations are complete, and I'm moving in tomorrow." Jennifer found her voice first. "Mom, this is crazy. That property costs millions. How could you possibly afford it?" "Ruth Campbell left me an inheritance when she passed away. $850,000. I used most of it to purchase the estate." Scott's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "Ruth Campbell? Your patient? Why would she leave you that kind of money?" "She was more than a patient. She was my friend. She knew I'd given everything to my family, and she wanted me to have something that was just for me." Jennifer leaned forward, her voice hushed despite the privacy of our room. "Mom, do you have any idea what you've done? You can't just spend that kind of money on a whim. What about our future? What about Tyler and Emma's college funds?" I pulled out the second folder. "I've thought about that too. I've established trusts for both children's education. The money can only be used for tuition and related expenses, and only Tyler and Emma can access it when they reach college age." Scott snatched the folder, flipping through the legal documents with growing agitation. "You did all this without consulting us? Without financial advice from someone who actually understands wealth management?" "I consulted with a very reputable financial advisor," I replied calmly. "The same one Ruth used for years." "This is unbelievable," Scott muttered, throwing the papers down. "Absolutely unbelievable. Do you have any idea how long I've been working toward buying that property? The connections I've been cultivating? The investors I've been courting? And you just waltz in and buy it out from under me?" "I didn't know you were actively pursuing it," I said, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. "I heard you mention it at Thanksgiving as something aspirational." "At Thanksgiving," Scott repeated, his eyes narrowing. "When I said you were financially irrelevant. That's what this is about, isn't it? Some petty revenge because I hurt your feelings?" I took another sip of water, maintaining my composure. "This isn't about revenge, Scott. It's about choices. For the first time in decades, I had the resources to make a choice that was entirely for me. Not for Jennifer, not for you, not for the grandchildren. For me." Jennifer was crying silently, now, tears tracking down her cheeks. "Mom, how could you be so selfish? That money could have secured all our futures." "No, Jennifer, that money secured my future. You and Scott are young, successful professionals with decades of earning ahead of you. I'm 60 years old with a modest pension that barely covers basic expenses." "So, what are you going to do with that massive house?" Scott demanded. "Rattle around in it all by yourself?" "For now, yes. Though I've been considering turning part of it into a small bed and breakfast. The boathouse would make a charming guest cottage." Scott's laugh was bitter. "A bed and breakfast? You? You have no business experience, no hospitality training. You're a retired nurse, for God's sake." "I have excellent people skills, organizational abilities, and thanks to Ruth, the financial cushion to pursue something new." I folded my hands on the table. "But that's a decision for another day. Right now, I'm simply informing you of my move." "Were you even going to tell us before you did it?" Jennifer asked, her voice small. "Or would we have just shown up at your apartment one day to find you gone?" "Of course I was going to tell you. That's why we're here tonight." Scott pushed his plate away, appetite gone. "I can't believe this. All these years we've let you be part of our family, included you in holidays, given you time with the kids, and this is how you repay us? By undermining everything I've been working toward?" The phrase, "let you be part of our family," landed like a slap. As if my own daughter and her children were a privilege granted to me rather than my flesh and blood. "Scott," I said, my voice steady despite the anger building inside me. "I've contributed over $70,000 to your household over the years. I helped with your down payment. I provided free childcare that would have cost you tens of thousands more. I've never asked for recognition or repayment, but I will not sit here and be told that I should be grateful for being allowed to be part of my own family." Jennifer looked stricken. "Mom, you know Scott didn't mean it like that, didn't he?" I turned to her. "At Thanksgiving, when he called me financially irrelevant, did you speak up? Did you defend the mother who worked 3 jobs to put you through college? Or did you sit silently, allowing him to dismiss my entire life's work?" Jennifer had no answer, her gaze dropping to her untouched entree. Scott pushed back from the table. "This is ridiculous. If you want to waste your windfall on a house you can't possibly maintain, that's your business. But don't expect us to bail you out when the property taxes and maintenance costs overwhelm you." "I don't expect anything from either of you," I said quietly. "That's rather the point." Jennifer's head snapped up, hurt flashing in her eyes. "What is that supposed to mean? Are you cutting us off? Punishing us?" "No, Jennifer. I'm simply establishing boundaries. You and Scott have your lives. You make your choices. Now I'm making mine." Scott stood, throwing his napkin on the table. "Come on, Jen. This is a waste of time. Your mother has clearly lost her mind." Jennifer hesitated, torn between her husband and her mother. "Mom, please. Can't we discuss this more? Maybe look at other options that could benefit everyone?" "There's nothing to discuss," Scott interrupted. "She's made her position clear." "There's something else you should know," I said, before they could leave. I've listed my apartment for sale. The closing is next week. After that, my only residence will be the Lakeview estate." Scott's expression darkened further. "So you've burned all your bridges." Typical impulsive decision from someone who doesn't understand basic financial planning. "Actually," I corrected him, "it's an investment decision. The real estate market is strong and I'll make a significant profit on the sale. That money will go into my retirement fund for future security." Scott grabbed Jennifer's arm. "We're leaving. When you come to your senses, Barb, give us a call." As they walked out, I called after them. "Tyler and Emma are always welcome at my new home. I've set up rooms just for them." Jennifer paused at the door, looking back with red-rimmed eyes. "How could you do this, Mom? How could you choose a house over your family?" "I didn't choose a house over family, Jennifer. I chose myself after a lifetime of choosing everyone else. There's a difference." After they left, I sat alone in the private dining room, finishing my wine in the quiet. The confrontation had gone almost exactly as I'd anticipated. Scott's anger, Jennifer's tears, the accusations of selfishness. Yet I felt strangely light, as if a heavy backpack I'd been carrying for decades had finally been set down. The waiter appeared discreetly. "Will your guests be returning, Mrs. Wilson?" "No," I replied, smiling slightly. "But I'd still like dessert. The tiramisu, please." As I savored each bite of the rich dessert I'd never normally indulge in, I thought about the road ahead. Jennifer would come around eventually. Her sense of family obligation ran too deep for a permanent estrangement. Scott would take longer, his pride more severely wounded. The children would be my bridge back to them, their natural curiosity about Grandma's big house by the lake too enticing to resist. My phone buzzed with a text from Carol. "How did it go?" I typed back, "Exactly as expected. I'll tell you everything. Tomorrow after the move." When the bill arrived, I paid it without looking at the total. Another small liberation from a lifetime of counting every penny. Outside, the March evening was cool, but not cold, with the first hints of spring in the UI air. I drove back to my apartment for my final night there, boxes stacked around me like sentinels marking the passage from one life to another. In the morning, I would wake early. I would make coffee in a pot destined for the donation center. I would watch the sun rise from windows that would no longer be mine. And then I would step into a future where I was no longer financially irrelevant, no longer taken for granted, no longer invisible. A future that, for the first time in decades, belonged entirely to me. The morning sunlight streamed through the stained glass transom of my new front door, casting jewel-toned patterns across the polished floor of the entryway. It was moving day. My first morning waking up in the Lakeview estate, my estate. After the confrontation at Giovanni's last night, I'd returned to my apartment for a restless final sleep surrounded by boxes and memories. Now, standing in the soaring foyer of my new home, the weight of the previous evening seemed to evaporate in the clear light of dawn. The movers arrived precisely at 8, carefully transferring the possessions I'd chosen to keep from my old life to their designated places in the new one. I directed them with quiet confidence, no longer second-guessing each decision as I might have done mere months ago. My mother's antique secretary desk belonged in the library. The quilt handmade by my grandmother would drape across the four-poster bed in the guest room I'd prepared for Carol. The collection of framed family photographs, spanning from Jennifer's infancy through Tyler and Emma's recent school portraits, would line the hallway leading to the children's rooms. By noon, the moving van had departed, and the furniture delivery trucks began arriving in sequence. Each brought carefully selected pieces: the emerald velvet sofa for the sitting room, the hand-carved dining table that could seat 12, the buttery leather reading chairs positioned to catch the afternoon light. As each room came together, I felt a sense of rightness settle over me. This space, with its graceful proportions and century-old craftsmanship, wasn't just a house I owned. It was becoming an expression of who I truly was. Carol arrived mid-afternoon, carrying a housewarming gift wrapped in silvery paper. "I wouldn't miss your first day in the castle," she announced, handing me the package. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal with my initials embossed on the cover. "For recording the next chapter," she explained, squeezing my hand. We uncorked a bottle of champagne and wandered through the rooms, admiring how different they looked now that they were furnished. The house was beginning to breathe with life. "Have you heard from Jennifer or Scott since last night?" Carol asked, settling into one of the window seats overlooking the back gardens. I shook my head. Not a word. I didn't really expect to. Scott was furious, and Jennifer was caught in the middle, as usual. "Give them time," Carol advised. "This is a shock to their system. They've never had to see you as an independent person with your own resources before." "I know, and I genuinely don't want to punish them. I just needed to establish some boundaries." "Some very luxurious boundaries," Carol laughed, gesturing at our sumptuous surroundings. "It's not about the luxury," I corrected her gently. "It could have been a modest cottage, and I would have felt the same way. It's about having something that's mine, on my terms." "I know that," Carol nodded. "But you have to admit, the look on Scott's face when you showed him the deed was pretty satisfying." I smiled despite myself. It was illuminating, like watching someone's entire worldview collapse in real time. We spent the rest of the afternoon arranging books on shelves, hanging artwork, and placing the small personal touches that would transform this grand space into a home. As evening approached, we ordered pizza, a deliberate departure from the formality of Giovanni's the night before, and ate it picnic-style on the floor of the sunroom, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and crimson. "To Ruth," I said, raising my glass in a toast, "for making this possible." "To Ruth," Carol echoed, "and to Barbara Wilson, who finally realized she deserves to take up space in this world." After Carol left, I wandered through the quiet rooms of my new kingdom. In the library, I ran my fingers along the spines of books I'd collected over decades but rarely had time to read. In the kitchen, I arranged my mother's handwritten recipe cards in a wooden box on the counter. In what would be Tyler's room? When he visited, I placed the model airplane kits I'd purchased, knowing how much he loved building things. In Emma's room, I arranged stuffed animals on the window seat and filled a bookshelf with the fairy tales she adored. Creating these spaces for my grandchildren felt important, a bridge back to the family that was still reeling from my Declaration of Independence. I wasn't cutting ties. I was simply changing the terms of our relationship. As I prepared for my first night's sleep in my new bedroom, my phone chimed with a text message. It was from Jennifer. "The kids are asking where you are. What should I tell them?" I considered my response carefully. "Tell them the truth. Grandma has moved to a beautiful house by the lake, and they're welcome to visit any time. I have rooms just for them." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared as Jennifer composed her reply. Finally, "Scott doesn't want them to visit yet. He says we need to establish ground rules first." Ground rules, as if my home were potentially dangerous territory requiring diplomatic protocols. I took a deep breath before responding. "I understand. When Scott is ready to talk, I'm here. Meanwhile, please tell Tyler and Emma I love them and miss them." Jennifer replied immediately, "I will. Good night, Mom." It wasn't much, but it was a start. An acknowledgement, at least, that the lines of communication remained open. I placed my phone on the nightstand and slipped between the crisp sheets of my new bed, gazing out at the moonlight shimmering on the lake beyond my windows. For the first night in my adult life, every decision that had led to this moment had been entirely my own. The first week in my new home passed in a pleasant blur of settling in and exploration. I learned the house's rhythms, which floorboards creaked, which windows caught the morning light, how to adjust the century-old radiators to maintain perfect comfort. I discovered hidden features the previous owners had incorporated during various renovations: a small dumbwaiter connecting the kitchen to the formal dining room, a secret passage between 2 upstairs bedrooms that would delight Tyler and Emma when they eventually visited, a root cellar perfect for storing wine. On day 3, I hired a gardener to resurrect the neglected grounds. Howard was a retired landscape architect who approached the overgrown gardens with the reverence of someone uncovering long-buried treasure. "There's structure here," he explained, pointing out stone pathways nearly obscured by weeds. "And these dormant rose bushes along the southern wall. They're heritage varieties. With some care, they'll bloom magnificently by summer." I gave him free rein to restore the gardens to their former glory, with the only requirement being a vegetable plot where I could grow tomatoes and herbs. He seemed delighted by the challenge, arriving each morning with sketches and samples, eager to discuss his vision for each section of the grounds. By the end of the week, I'd established new routines. Mornings began with coffee on the east-facing porch, watching the sun rise over the lake. Afternoons often found me in the library, finally reading the classics I'd always claimed I would get to someday. Evenings might include a glass of wine in the garden, a cooking experiment in my spacious new kitchen, or dinner with Carol, who had quickly become a regular visitor. I attended my book club meetings and cooking classes with newfound confidence, no longer checking my phone constantly for messages from Jennifer or rearranging my schedule at the last minute to accommodate babysitting requests. Several of my new acquaintances accepted invitations to small gatherings at Lakeview, exclaiming over the home's beauty and my good fortune. "How long have you lived here?" asked Maria, a retired professor from my book club, during one such gathering. "Just over a week," I admitted. "It's still quite new to me." "It suits you perfectly," she declared. "Some houses have personalities that need to match their owners. This one needed someone with quiet elegance and depth." The compliment warmed me in an unexpected way. For decades, I'd been defined solely by my relation to others: Jennifer's mother, Tyler and Emma's grandmother, Scott's mother-in-law. Maria saw me simply as Barbara, a woman whose essence matched the dignified beauty of this historic home. The second week brought a tentative text from Jennifer. "The kids really want to see your new house. Would Sunday afternoon work?" My heart leapt at the prospect of seeing my grandchildren. Sunday would be perfect. Shall I expect you as well? Just dropping them off if that's okay. Scott has a golf game and I have work to catch up on. We could pick them up around 6? I recognized the excuse for what it was. Jennifer wasn't ready to fully engage with my new reality. But I was willing to accept these terms if it meant seeing Tyler and Emma. That's fine. I'll have dinner ready for them. Sunday arrived with perfect spring weather, warm enough for the children to explore the lakefront, but with a gentle breeze that kept the bugs at bay. I spent the morning preparing their favorite foods: Tyler's beloved mac and cheese with the crispy breadcrumb topping, Emma's strawberry lemonade, cookies shaped like sailboats in honor of our lakeside location. At precisely 2 o'clock, Jennifer's SUV pulled into the circular driveway. From my position at the front windows, I watched as Tyler and Emma tumbled out of the back seat, their eyes widening as they took in the grand facade of their grandmother's new home. Jennifer remained behind the wheel, waving briefly in my direction, but making no move to exit the vehicle. I opened the front door as the children bounded up the steps. "Grandma!" Emma shrieked, hurling herself into my arms. "Your house is like a castle!" Tyler, trying to maintain the dignity of his 8 years, approached more cautiously. "Is it really all yours?" he asked, his gaze traveling up to the third-floor dormers and back down to the stone foundation. "It really is," I confirmed, ushering them inside. "And I've made special rooms just for you two." Jennifer honked once and drove away as I closed the door behind us. The children barely noticed her departure, too entranced by the grand staircase and crystal chandelier in the entryway. "Can we see everything?" Emma asked, already halfway up the stairs. "Of course. Let's start with your rooms, and then we can explore the whole house and grounds." I led them to the second floor, where I'd prepared adjacent bedrooms connected by the secret passage. Tyler's room featured a nautical theme, with model ships, maps, and a telescope positioned at the window overlooking the lake. Emma's was a fairy tale wonderland, with gauzy curtains, a canopy bed, and a bookshelf shaped like a castle. "This is the coolest room ever," Tyler declared, immediately gravitating toward the telescope. Emma was speechless, turning in circles to take in every detail of her enchanted space. When she discovered the hidden door behind the bookshelf leading to Tyler's room, her squeal of delight echoed through the house. We spent the afternoon exploring every nook and cranny of Lakeview Estate. The children raced through the gardens, discovered the boathouse at the water's edge, tested the acoustics in the formal dining room by singing at the top of their lungs. They asked endless questions about the house's history, marveling at the idea that it had stood for over a century. "Were you rich this whole time, Grandma?" Emma asked as we baked cookies in the kitchen. "Is that why you could buy a castle?" "No, sweetheart," I explained, helping her cut out another sailboat shape. "I received an unexpected gift from a dear friend who passed away. She left me money that made it possible to buy this house." "Dad says you should have used the money for our college," Tyler commented, his focus on perfectly placing chocolate chips on his cookies. He was really mad when he came home from dinner that night. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "Your future education is very important to me. That's why I've set up special accounts just for your college, separate from the house." "But Dad says—" "Tyler," I interrupted gently. "Sometimes grown-ups disagree about how to handle money. That's okay. The important thing is that I love you and Emma very much, and now you have this wonderful place to visit whenever you'd like." Emma, blissfully unaware of the subtext, chimed in. "Can we come swimming in the summer? And have sleepovers in our special rooms?" "Absolutely," I assured her. "That's exactly why I created those spaces for you." We ate our cookies on the back porch, watching sailboats drift across the lake as the afternoon sun warmed our faces. For those few precious hours, the tension with Jennifer and Scott faded into the background, eclipsed by the simple joy of connecting with my grandchildren in my new home. At 6 o'clock precisely, Jennifer's SUV reappeared in the driveway. This time, she did exit the vehicle, approaching the house with visible trepidation. I met her at the front door, Tyler and Emma dancing excitedly around me. "Mom!" Emma cried, tugging at Jennifer's sleeve. "Grandma has a secret passage between our rooms, and a telescope, and a boathouse." "That's nice, honey," Jennifer replied, her eyes scanning the grand entryway with a mixture of awe and discomfort. "Did you thank Grandma for having you over?" "Thank you, Grandma," the children chorused. "Can we come back next weekend?" I looked to Jennifer, unwilling to make promises without her approval. "That depends on your parents' plans," I said. Diplomatically, Jennifer's posture was stiff, her smile forced. "We'll have to see. Say goodbye now, kids. Dad's waiting for us at home." As the children hugged me goodbye, I whispered to Jennifer, "Would you like to sit for a moment? Have a cup of tea?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not today. I should get back." "Scott, well, he's still processing everything." "I understand," I said, though part of me wanted to point out that there was nothing for Scott to process. My inheritance and my home had nothing to do with him. But alienating Jennifer further wouldn't help anyone. "The invitation stands whenever you're ready." She nodded, gathering the children and their backpacks. "The house is impressive, Mom. I just wish you'd talked to us before making such a huge decision." "Would it have changed anything?" I asked quietly. Jennifer had no answer for that. With a tight smile, she herded Tyler and Emma toward the car, leaving me standing in the doorway of the home they now knew was entirely mine. That evening, I called Carol to report on the visit. "The kids loved it," I told her. "Jennifer, not so much." "Give her time," Carol advised. "She's torn between her loyalties. Scott's ego is bruised, and she's probably got to listen to him rant about your betrayal every night." "I know, I don't blame her. But I won't apologize for taking control of my own life either." The following week brought an unexpected development. While having lunch at the Daily Grind, I overheard a conversation at the next table regarding the Lakeside Historical Society's annual home tour. "We're short one property for the Lake District," a woman was saying. "The Hendersons pulled out at the last minute due to their renovation delays." Without fully thinking it through, I turned in my seat. "Excuse me, I couldn't help overhearing. I recently purchased the Lakeview estate, and I'd be happy to include it in your tour." The woman, Patricia Sullivan, as she soon introduced herself, was delighted by the offer. "The Lakeview estate! We've been trying to get that property on the tour for years, but the previous owners were so private. Are you certain you wouldn't mind opening your home to visitors?" "Not at all," I assured her. "The renovations are complete, and it would be a pleasure to share the house's history with the community." Patricia explained that the tour was scheduled for the following month, with proceeds benefiting the Lakeside Historical Society's preservation efforts. Each homeowner would work with a volunteer docent who would guide visitors through the property, highlighting architectural features and historical details. As I walked home from the cafe, I considered my impulsive offer. The home tour would inevitably reveal to the entire community that I, Barbara Wilson, retired nurse and supposedly financially irrelevant woman, now owned one of the most prestigious properties in Lakeside. Scott's social circle would be buzzing with the news before the first tour group crossed my threshold. The thought caused a momentary flutter of anxiety in my chest, quickly replaced by a sense of quiet determination. Let them talk. Let them wonder. Let them reassess every dismissive assumption they'd ever made about me. 2 days later, I met with Patricia and a volunteer named James, a retired architecture professor who'd be serving as my docent for the tour. He was practically giddy with excitement as we walked through the house, pointing out features I hadn't even noticed. The distinctive glass doorknobs original to the 1897 construction, the hand-painted ceiling medallions in the parlor, the unusual, curved windows in the breakfast nook. This home is a nearly perfect example of shingle-style architecture with Queen Anne influences, he explained, running a reverent hand along the carved newel post of the main staircase. The preservation work you've done is exceptional. You've modernized without compromising the historical integrity. I can't take credit for most of that, I admitted. The previous owners did the major renovations. I've just refreshed things and made the space my own. Well, you've done it beautifully, Patricia added. The furnishings complement the architecture perfectly. As they continued discussing logistics for the tour, my thoughts drifted to Scott and Jennifer. Would they attend? Would they see this as another act of defiance on my part? Or would they finally recognize that this wasn't about them at all? That question was answered, at least partially, the next day. While selecting plants at a nursery for my new vegetable garden, I quite literally ran shopping carts with Diane Mitchell, Scott's mother. "Barbara," she said, her surprise evident in the slight widening of her eyes. "I didn't expect to see you here?" "Hello, Diane," I replied, keeping my tone pleasant. "Just picking up some tomato seedlings for my garden." Her gaze flicked to my cart, noting the quantity of plants. "That looks like more than would fit in an apartment balcony. Garden." "Oh, these aren't for an apartment," I said casually. "They're for my new home. I've moved, actually." "Yes," she said, her voice cooling notably. "I heard. The Lakeview estate, isn't it? Quite a surprise to everyone." I smiled, noting her careful phrasing. Not quite a surprise to us, but to everyone, as if distancing herself from any personal shock. It was an opportunity I couldn't pass up. The house has such wonderful character. Indeed. She adjusted her designer sunglasses. "Richard and I toured it years ago when we were considering a lake property. Lovely bones, but so much maintenance. The property taxes alone must be astronomical." "They're manageable," I replied, deliberately vague, "and worth every penny for that view." Diane nodded, a tight smile fixed on her face. "Well, we're all curious about how you suddenly acquired the means for such a purchase. Scott mentioned something about an inheritance from a former patient?" "From Ruth Campbell," I corrected. "She was my employer after retirement, and a dear friend. She was very generous. How fortunate for you." Her tone suggested luck rather than merit, though it's unusual to leave such substantial assets to an employee rather than family. "Ruth's children are both quite successful and well-established," I explained. "They understood her decision completely." Diane made a non-committal noise, then glanced at her watch. "I should be going. We have the charity committee meeting at noon." "Of course. It was nice seeing you, Diane." As she turned her cart to leave, she paused. "I understand you've offered your home for the Historical Society tour." "That's right. Richard and I are major donors to the Historical Society," she informed me. "We attend the home tour every year." I understood the implied threat, or perhaps warning, in her statement. The tour would bring Diane and Richard, likely accompanied by Scott and Jennifer, directly into my new domain. They would scrutinize every detail, evaluate every choice, judge whether I was playing house or truly belonged in such a prestigious setting. "Wonderful," I replied with genuine warmth. "I'll look forward to seeing you there." After Diane left, I continued selecting plants with renewed purpose. If the Mitchells would be evaluating my home and my worthiness to own it, then everything would be perfect. Not to impress them, but to demonstrate conclusively that I belonged exactly where I was. That evening, I received an unexpected call from Jennifer. "Mom," she began, her voice tight with controlled emotion. I ran into Diane at the club today. She mentioned seeing you at the nursery. Yes, we had a brief chat while selecting plants. She said you've signed up for the Historical Society home tour. That's right, I confirmed. It seemed like a nice way to support local preservation efforts. Jennifer sighed. Mom, can't you see how this looks? First you buy the house Scott has been talking about for years, then you announce it in the most dramatic way possible at Giovanni's, and now you're literally putting it on display for the entire town to walk through. Jennifer, I said calmly. The home tour was a spur-of-the-moment decision when I overheard they needed another lake property. It has nothing to do with Scott. Everything has to do with Scott when you're deliberately humiliating him. Do you know how many of his colleagues and clients will be on that tour? People he's told about his plans to acquire Lakeview someday? I took a deep breath, choosing patience over defensiveness. I'm sorry if Scott feels humiliated, but that was never my intention. My decisions about my own life and my own home are not about him. But they affect him. Jennifer's voice rose in frustration. They affect all of us. Tyler came home from your house talking nonstop about his cool room at Grandma's castle. And now Emma's room at our house isn't good enough anymore. Scott feels undermined as a provider. I feel caught in the middle. Why couldn't you just be happy with what you had? The question hung in the air between us, so revealing in its assumptions. What I had, I repeated slowly, was a small apartment, a modest pension, and a family that saw me primarily as a resource, a babysitter, a cook, a financial contributor, rather than as a person with my own needs and dreams. That's not fair, Jennifer protested. We love you. I know you do, I said gently, but loving someone and respecting their autonomy are different things. For 30 years, I put everyone else first. Now I'm learning to consider my own happiness too. That doesn't mean I love you any less. The line went quiet for a long moment. When Jennifer spoke again, her voice was softer. The kids really did love their rooms. They haven't stopped talking about coming back. They're welcome anytime, I assured her. So are you and Scott. Scott's not ready for that, she admitted. He says it's still too raw. I understand. There's no rush. After we hung up, I sat on my back porch watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of amber and gold. The conversation with Jennifer had been difficult but necessary, a step toward establishing our new relationship as mother and daughter, woman to woman, rather than provider and recipient. The home tour was scheduled for the third Saturday in Chihuahua, May. As the date approached, I focused on perfecting every detail of Lakeview Estate, inside and out. Howard, my gardener, coaxed the heritage roses into early bloom along the southern wall. The interior designer who'd helped select my furniture returned to add finishing touches, fresh flowers in antique vases, artfully arranged books, small sculptures positioned to catch the eye. The morning of the tour dawned clear and mild, ideal, whether for the hundreds of visitors who would be passing through Lakeside's historic homes. James, my docent, arrived early to review his notes and coordinate with the Historical Society volunteers who would manage the flow of visitors. You seem remarkably calm, he observed as I arranged cookies on a silver tray for the refreshment table on the back porch. Most homeowners are nervously straightening pillows and hiding personal items by now. I smiled. I suppose I've spent too many years worrying about others' judgments. Today, I'm just enjoying sharing this beautiful home with people who appreciate its history. Well, you're a natural hostess, James assured me, and this house looks absolutely stunning. At precisely noon, the first tour group arrived. I greeted them in the foyer before handing them over to James, who began eloquently, describing the architectural significance of various features. From my position near the refreshment table, I could hear snippets of his presentation as groups moved through the house. Stories about the original owners, explanations of the craftsmanship techniques used in the woodwork, anecdotes about famous visitors who had stayed at Lakeview over its century-plus history. The visitors were universally appreciative, many pausing to compliment me on the restoration and decoration. Several older residents shared memories of attending parties at Lakeview during its previous incarnations, adding rich layers to my understanding of my new home's place in the community's history. Midway through the afternoon, I spotted them, Richard and Diane, flanked by Scott and Jennifer, moving through my garden with the current tour group. Jennifer looked uncomfortable, Scott stony-faced, while his parents maintained the polite expressions of experienced socialites. I maintained my composure as I watched them approach through the gardens, stopping to examine the newly restored rose beds that Howard had coaxed into premature bloom. Richard pointed toward the boathouse with apparent interest, while Scott's gaze remained fixed on the main house's imposing facade. When they reached the back porch where I stood near the refreshment table, I smiled with genuine warmth. "Welcome to Lakeview," I said, extending my hand first to Richard, then Diane. "I'm so glad you could join the tour." Richard, ever the businessman, accepted my handshake with professional courtesy. "Impressive restoration work, Barbara. The property has excellent bones." "Thank you. Most of the structural work was done by the previous owners. I've simply refreshed things and made it my home." Diane's eyes swept across the antique serving pieces I'd arranged on the table, silver trays that had belonged to my grandmother, crystal punch bowls I'd found at estate sales over the years. "You've certainly acquired quite a collection of interesting pieces." "Many are family heirlooms," I replied evenly. "Others I've collected over time, waiting for the right place to display them." Jennifer hung back slightly, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. When our eyes met, I offered her a gentle smile. "The rose garden is just coming back to life," I told her. "By June, it should be spectacular." She nodded, her expression softening slightly. "The kids haven't stopped talking about their rooms. Tyler's been researching what kind of fish he might see from the boathouse." "He's welcome to come fishing anytime," I said, the invitation extending beyond my grandson to include my daughter as well. Scott, who had been silently assessing the gathering of Lakeside's social elite mingling on my property, finally spoke. "Quite a show you've put on here, Barb. The Historical Society must be thrilled." His tone carried a subtle edge that didn't escape me, an implication that this was all for display, a performance rather than my actual life. I chose to respond to the surface meaning rather than the subtext. "It's been a pleasure working with them. James is incredibly knowledgeable about the architectural history." I gestured toward my docent, who was enthusiastically describing the original woodwork to another tour group. "Would you like me to introduce you? He has fascinating stories about the home's previous owners." "No need," Scott replied curtly. "We're just passing through." Diane placed a restraining hand on her son's arm. "Actually, I'd love to see the interior. Patricia mentioned something about original stained glass in the library?" "Yes, there's a stunning Tiffany-inspired window above the bookshelves. Please help yourselves to refreshments and join the next group. James is an excellent guide." As if on cue, James announced the formation of the next tour, and the Mitchells, all except Jennifer, moved toward the gathering crowd. "Mom," Jennifer said quietly, hanging back. "Could I talk to you for a moment, privately?" My heart quickened. "Of course. Let's step into the kitchen." I led her through the French doors into the spacious kitchen, with its gleaming copper pots hanging above the center island and morning sunlight streaming through the mullioned windows. Jennifer's gaze traveled over the commercial-grade range, the marble countertops, the antique butcher block I'd had restored. "This is beautiful," she admitted. "It suits you somehow, though I never would have imagined you in a place like this." "That's because you've only ever seen me in spaces I could afford on a nurse's salary," I replied gently. "Not in spaces that reflect who I truly am." Jennifer nodded slowly, running a finger along the edge of the island. I wanted to apologize for Scott's behavior. He's struggling with all this. I understand. It must be difficult for him to adjust his perception of me. It's not just that. Jennifer's voice dropped further. He had investors lined up, Mom. He's been working for months on a plan to buy this property, subdivide it, and build luxury condos along the lakefront. The historical designation made it complicated, but he thought he'd found a way around it. When you bought it right out from under him, I felt a chill run through me. He was planning to tear down Lakeview? To build condos? Not tear it down entirely. Convert the main house into the centerpiece of the development. The historic heart of the project, he called it. The revelation stunned me. Not just that Scott had concrete plans for the property beyond vague aspirations, but that those plans involved fundamentally altering its character, destroying the very soul of this beautiful old home for profit. I had no idea, I said, and it was true. In all his boasting about Lakeview, Scott had never mentioned development plans. He was keeping it quiet until the financing was secure. That's why he was so shocked when you announced you'd bought it. Jennifer twisted her wedding ring nervously. The investors aren't happy, Mom. Some of them are people Scott works with every day. I'm sorry for any professional embarrassment this has caused Scott, but I don't regret my decision. I moved to the window, gazing out at the sweeping lawn. That, in Scott's vision, would have been carved into cramped lots for overpriced condominiums. This property deserves to remain intact, as it was intended. I know, Jennifer sighed. Honestly, I never liked the development idea either. It seemed wrong, somehow. But Scott was so excited about the potential profits. A charged silence fell between us. I could sense Jennifer struggling with divided loyalties, between her husband's ambitions and her own sense of what was right, between the father of her children and the mother who had sacrificed everything for her. The kids' rooms really are perfect, she finally said. You know exactly what they love. I've been paying attention to them their whole lives, I replied with a smile. Just as I paid attention to you when you were small. Do you remember that dollhouse I made you for your 8th birthday? With the tiny furniture I sewed and the little books with actual pages? Jennifer's expression softened with memory. I loved that dollhouse. I played with it until I was way too old for dolls. You used to create elaborate stories about the family that lived there, their dinner parties, their secret passages, their adventures. I'd forgotten about that, she admitted. I think that's why Emma loves fairy tales so much. I tell her stories the way you used to tell them to me. The connection between generations, from me to Jennifer, from Jennifer to Emma, felt like a delicate bridge forming across the chasm that had opened between us. It wasn't about money or property or status. It was about the inheritance of imagination and love that flowed through our family's women. You're welcome here anytime, I told her. With or without Scott. This doesn't have to change the important things between us. Jennifer nodded, blinking back unexpected tears. I should get back to the others before they notice I'm gone. As she turned to leave, I gently touched her arm. Jennifer, I need you to understand something. This house, Ruth's gift to me, they aren't about taking something away from you or Scott or the children. They're about me finally allowing myself to receive something after a lifetime of giving. I know that, Mom. I'm starting to understand. She hesitated, then added, and I'm sorry for not speaking up at Thanksgiving when Scott said those things. To you. I should have defended you. The acknowledgement meant more than she could possibly know. Thank you for saying that. Jennifer rejoined her family just as they were completing the interior tour. From my vantage point at the refreshment table, I could see Scott's tight expression as James enthusiastically described the craftsmanship of the grand staircase. Diane maintained her social smile, though her eyes registered every detail with calculating assessment. Richard seemed genuinely interested in the architectural features, asking questions about the original construction methods. As they prepared to depart, I approached one last time. "Thank you for coming. I hope you enjoyed the tour." "Magnificent home," Richard said with businessman's appreciation. "You made an excellent investment, Barbara." "Thank you, Richard. Though I see it less as an investment and more as a sanctuary." Diane adjusted her designer sunglasses. "Well, you've certainly made a splash in Lakeside society. Everyone will be talking about this for weeks." I recognized the veiled criticism, but chose to accept the surface meaning. The Historical Society deserves the attention. They do important preservation work. Scott remained silent, his jaw clenched as he surveyed what might have been his development project. Jennifer touched his arm gently, a silent plea for civility. "The children are asking when they can return," she said. "Maybe next weekend?" Before Scott could object, I seized the opportunity. "I'd love that. I'm planning to take the rowboat out if the weather's good. Tyler might enjoy learning to row." Jennifer nodded, a small act of independence. "We'll be in touch about the time." As they walked away, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: satisfaction that the confrontation had occurred without major drama, sadness at the lingering tension with Scott, hope for healing with Jennifer, and most surprisingly, relief that I had unwittingly prevented Lakeview from being carved into a soulless development project. The remainder of the home tour passed in a blur of appreciative visitors and enthusiastic history buffs. By late afternoon, when the last tour group departed, I was pleasantly exhausted. James and the Historical Society volunteers gathered their materials expressing effusive gratitude for my participation. "The Lakeview estate was the highlight of the tour," Patricia assured me. "Everyone is saying so. Would you consider participating again next year?" "I'd be delighted," I replied, surprising myself with how much I meant it. Opening my home had connected me to the community in a way I hadn't anticipated, establishing my place not just as the owner of a prestigious property, but as a steward of Lakeside's history. After everyone left, I kicked off my shoes and settled on the back porch with a well-deserved glass of wine. The late afternoon sun cast golden light across the gardens, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of newly bloomed roses. The tranquility was interrupted only by the chirping of birds and the distant puttering of a boat on the lake. My phone rang. Carol, eager for a full report on the Mitchell family's visit. How did it go? Was Scott's head actually smoking? Or did he maintain a semblance of composure? I laughed. He was rigidly polite, but Jennifer told me something interesting. Scott had plans to buy Lakeview and turn it into condos. "That explains a lot," Carol replied. "No wonder he's been so bent out of shape. You didn't just buy a house he admired. You derailed his big development project." "Apparently so, though I had no idea at the time." "Call it karmic intervention," Carol suggested. "The universe making sure this beautiful old place ended up with someone who would honor its history instead of chopping it up for profit." The thought was comforting, that perhaps Ruth's gift and my impulse purchase had served some larger purpose beyond my personal transformation. That Lakeview and I had somehow found each other at precisely the right moment for both of us. "Jennifer is bringing the kids next weekend," I told Carol. "I think we're making progress." "That's wonderful. One step at a time." The spring evening stretched before me, peaceful and full of possibility. After saying goodbye to Carol, I decided to walk through the gardens Howard had so lovingly begun to restore. The meandering stone pathways led me past the rose garden, through a small orchard of ancient apple trees just beginning to blossom, and eventually down to the lakeshore where the boathouse stood silhouetted against the setting sun. Inside the boathouse, the rowboat Ruth had mentioned in her bequest was suspended from the ceiling, a classic wooden craft with hand-polished oars. According to Ruth's letter, the boat had belonged to her father, who had taught her to row on. this very lake nearly 80 years ago. With Tyler's visit approaching, I made a mental note to have the boat lowered and checked for safety before introducing my grandson to the joy of rowing. As I walked back toward the house, darkness beginning to settle across the gardens, I spotted a figure standing at the edge of my property, partially obscured by the shadow of an oak tree. It was Scott, alone, staring up at Lakeview with an unreadable expression. I considered approaching him but decided against it. Whatever reckoning he needed to make with this house and his thwarted plans for it was his own journey. After a moment, he turned and walked away, disappearing beyond the property. Line without having seen me? His solitary visit, unannounced and after hours, spoke volumes about his complicated emotions regarding Lakeview and me. The following week brought unexpected developments. First, a formal letter arrived from the Lakeside Historical Society, informing me that Lakeview Estate had been nominated for inclusion in the National Register of Historic Places. The nomination, initiated by the previous owners but stalled during the property's sale, would provide additional protections for the house and grounds, making any future development plans even more difficult to execute. I signed the consent forms immediately, feeling a deep satisfaction in knowing that Lakeview would be preserved long after my ownership ended. The historical designation wasn't just an honor. It was a responsibility to maintain the property's integrity for future generations. The second development was more personal. Jennifer called midweek, her voice tentative but determined. "Mom, I was thinking, instead of just dropping the kids off this weekend, maybe I could stay too. I'd like to see more of the house, maybe help you with lunch for the children." "I'd love that," I replied, careful to keep my tone casual despite the surge of hope I felt. "There's plenty of room." "Scott won't be joining us," she added quickly. "He has business to attend to." I understood the subtext. Scott wasn't ready to accept my new reality, but Jennifer was cautiously reaching across the divide. "That's fine. This can be our time together." When Saturday arrived, I prepared the house with special care. Fresh flowers from the garden adorned every room. The kitchen was stocked with ingredients for the children's favorite lunch: grilled cheese sandwiches cut into boat shapes, homemade tomato soup, and chocolate chip cookies for dessert. I'd had the rowboat lowered from the boathouse ceiling and inspected by a local craftsman who pronounced it sound for gentle use on the calm lake. Jennifer arrived promptly at 10, the children tumbling from the car with excited energy. Tyler immediately asked about the rowboat he'd spotted during their previous visit, while Emma wanted to show her mother the princess room with its canopy bed and hidden passageway. "We have all day," I assured them, embracing each in turn. "There's time for everything." Jennifer stood awkwardly in the foyer, taking in details she'd missed during the more formal home tour. "It really is beautiful, Mom. So much light everywhere." "That's what drew me to it initially," I told her, leading the way toward the kitchen. "That, and the feeling of history in every corner. Would you like some coffee? The children and I can bake cookies this morning before lunch." The morning unfolded with a comfortable rhythm. Jennifer gradually relaxed as we moved through the house, asking questions about various features and admiring the way I'd blended family heirlooms with new acquisitions. The children alternated between helping with cookie preparation and exploring, the grounds under our watchful eyes from the kitchen windows. As we worked side by side rolling cookie dough, Jennifer broached the subject that clearly weighed on her mind. Scott's investment group dissolved yesterday. They're abandoning the condo project entirely, not just here but at the other lakefront locations they were considering. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully. "I hope it hasn't caused Scott too much professional damage." Jennifer shrugged slightly. "He'll recover. The market's shifting anyway. Luxury condos aren't selling like they were a few years ago." She pressed a cookie cutter into the dough with perhaps more force than necessary. "He's already talking about a new project downtown, converting an old warehouse into loft apartments." "That sounds promising," I offered. "More preservation than destruction." I think so too, Jennifer agreed. And honestly, I never liked the idea of developing this property. It seemed sacrilegious somehow. The admission surprised me. You never mentioned any reservations. Scott was so excited about it, and I've gotten used to supporting his vision even when I don't entirely share it. She glanced up from her task, meeting my eyes directly. I think I learned that from watching you with Dad all those years, always putting his dreams first, then mine, never prioritizing your own. The observation struck me with its insight. Jennifer had absorbed lessons from my life that I hadn't intended to teach, lessons about women's roles and self-sacrifice that belonged to an earlier generation. That's not what I wanted you to learn from me, I said gently. I wanted you to see strength and independence. But you showed me duty and sacrifice, Jennifer replied without accusation. You worked so hard for me, for our family. You never complained. You just gave and gave until there was almost nothing left of me, I finished for her. That's not a legacy I want to pass on to you, or to Emma. Jennifer nodded, her eyes glistening slightly. When Scott said those things at Thanksgiving, about you being financially irrelevant, part of me was horrified, but another part thought, well, that's what happens to women who put everyone else first. Was seeing my own future. The realization hit me with unexpected force, that Jennifer's silence during Scott's cruel assessment hadn't been simple cowardice or lack of loyalty to me. It had been fear for her own eventual fate, recognition of a pattern she was already repeating. It doesn't have to be that way, I told her, covering her flour-dusted hand with mine. That's what I'm trying to show you now. It's never too late to claim your own space in the world. The conversation might have continued, but Tyler burst into the kitchen, breathless with excitement. Grandma, there's a family of ducks near the boathouse. Can we take them some bread? Better than bread, I smiled, grateful for the innocent interruption. I have some cracked corn in the garden. Should that's healthier for them? Let's all go see. The afternoon unfolded in simple pleasures, feeding ducks, rowing the small boat close to shore with Tyler and Emma taking turns handling the oars under my guidance, picnicking on the back porch with the cookies they'd helped bake. Jennifer gradually shed the tension she'd arrived with, laughing at the children's antics and sharing memories of her own childhood visits to lakeside properties owned by school friends. I always envied those kids who had lake houses, she admitted as we watched Tyler and Emma play on the sprawling lawn. Now my mother owns the grandest one of all. Life is full of surprises. Speaking of surprises, I said cautiously, I've been thinking about the future, about legacy. Jennifer glanced at me, suddenly alert. What do you mean? I'm establishing a trust for Lakeview. After I'm gone, the house will pass to you and the children, but with provisions to maintain its historical integrity. No development, no subdivision. Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. Scott won't like that. The trust isn't about Scott. It's about preserving something beautiful for future generations of our family. I turned to face her directly. But there's something else, something immediate. I'd like to establish college funds for Tyler and Emma, substantial ones that can't be touched for any other purpose. Mom, that's incredibly generous, but it's not negotiable, Jennifer. Education was always my priority for you, and it will be for my grandchildren as well. The funds will be in their names, accessible only for educational expenses when they reach college age. Jennifer studied me with new understanding. You've thought of everything, protecting the house from Scott's development ideas, protecting the children's education from whatever might happen. I'm being practical, I replied. Ruth's gift changed my life. I want to ensure it benefits those I love most, but in ways that can't be misused or diverted. You don't trust us, Jennifer said, but there was no accusation. In her tone, only recognition. I trust you with my life and my love, I corrected. But money changes people. I've seen it happen too often. The sun was beginning to lower toward the western shore of the lake, casting long shadows across the lawn where Tyler and Emma now lay exhausted from their day of exploration. Jennifer checked her watch reluctantly. We should probably head home. Soon. Scott will be wondering where we are. You could stay for dinner, I suggested. There's plenty of food and the guest rooms are made up. Jennifer hesitated, clearly tempted. Not tonight. One step at a time, right? She offered a small smile. But maybe next time. A proper sleepover for the kids. I'd like that very much. As they prepared to leave, Tyler and Emma provided detailed instructions about what must be preserved until their next visit. The Duck family must be monitored. The secret passage must remain secret. The cookie jar must be refilled. I promised solemnly to maintain everything exactly as they wished. Jennifer embraced me at the door, a real hug rather than the perfunctory ones we'd exchanged in recent years. Thank you for today, for everything. Thank you for coming, for being open to this new chapter. After they drove away, I stood on the front steps of Lakeview in the golden evening light, feeling a profound sense of peace settle over me. The day had brought healing I hadn't dared to hope for, not complete reconciliation, but the beginning of a new understanding between mother and daughter. Inside, the house still held the echoes of children's laughter and the scent of freshly baked cookies. I moved through the rooms, straightening here and there, but mostly appreciating the subtle signs of life that now animated spaces that had once been perfectly arranged but empty. A smudge of chocolate on the kitchen counter, Emma's hair ribbon, left behind on her bedroom floor. Tyler's crude sketch of the rowboat abandoned on the library desk. These small imperfections made Lakeview feel truly like home in a way that perfect staging never could. They represented connection, family, continuity, the very things I had feared losing when I made my declaration of independence at Giovanni's. That night, I sat in the library with Ruth's journals, which I'd discovered in a box of personal effects her children had given me after her passing. Her elegant handwriting filled volume after volume, chronicling her thoughts on everything from politics to poetry, her travels across Europe in her youth, her observations about aging and legacy as she grew older. One entry, dated just months before her death, caught my attention. I've decided about the house. It must go to Barbara. My children have their own beautiful homes and no sentimental attachment to Lakeview. They appreciate the financial value, but not the soul of the place. Barbara will see it differently. She has lived her entire life in service to others, subsisting on crumbs of beauty while giving away the loaf. It's time she had a place that reflects the grandeur of her spirit. Not to impress others, but to finally live in alignment with her true self. Lakeview needs a caretaker who understands that a house this old is not merely property, but a living repository of memories and possibilities. Barbara will be that caretaker. I've seen how she touches the woodwork when she thinks I'm not looking, how she pauses to admire the light through the stained glass. She belongs here, though she doesn't know it yet. Tears blurred my vision as I read Ruth's words. She had seen me, truly seen me, in a way that even my own family had not. She had recognized a kindred spirit behind the professional mask of the nurse, the dutiful facade of the mother and grandmother. And in her final act of generosity, she had given me not just financial freedom, but a physical manifestation of what she called the grandeur of my spirit. Looking around at the library with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, its deep window seats, its quiet elegance, I felt Ruth's presence and her validation. This room, this house, this new life, they weren't an act of revenge against Scott's cruel words or a selfish grasping for status. They were in alignment with my authentic self after decades of compromise and concession. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 11, its resonant tones echoing through the quiet house. Outside, moonlight silvered the lake's surface, and a light breeze stirred the newly planted garden. Inside, wrapped in the embrace of Lakeview's history and Ruth's blessing, I felt profoundly at home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be more difficult conversations with Scott, more delicate negotiations of family dynamics, more adjustments to my unexpected role as the owner of one of Lakeside's most prestigious properties. But tonight, in this moment of quiet, reflection, I knew with certainty that I had made the right choice, not just in buying Lakeview, but in finally choosing myself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.